Hello, everyone, and welcome to my podcast, The Cybersecurity Bridge. If you are one of the few people on Earth who's never seen the Cybersecurity Bridge or listened to the Cybersecurity Bridge, what are you doing? I keep emphasizing that. But to give you a description, the Cybersecurity Bridge podcast focuses on an area of cybersecurity. And in each episode, we break it into three parts. The first part, we talk about the present of that area of cybersecurity. The second part, we talk about the future of that area. And the third is the cybersecurity bridge. How do we get from the present to the future? Now, we're not talking about an area per se this week, but we're talking to a person who holds a title that we all should know about in cybersecurity, and that's CISO, John Sapp from Texas Mutual. John, welcome.
Hey, John. Thank you for having me on. Glad to be here.
Now, we're about to talk about cybersecurity. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions, but before we do, are you ready to play cybersecurity trivia?
Let's do it.
All right. Now, I'm reading this because I wrote it down. Lots of research here, John. In 1994, Citigroup was suffered a cyber attack where a Russian attacker compromised the bank's dial-up wire transfer system and attempted to move $10.7 million through 40 transfers. Now, that breach led to the creation of what's known as the first CISO position. Was that person Mark Weatherford, Howard Schmidt, Steve Katz, Bill Bonney, or Ed Amoroso?
So great question. I know three of the five folks on that list. Bill Bonney, I remember meeting him a while back. It's not him. Howard Schmidt, had a chance to meet him during an opportunity I had to go to the White House. But it is Steve Katz.
You are correct, sir. And each of those individuals is a CISO and a pretty prominent CISO, but you knew the answer, so we can now move on. So I did some research on you, John, and one of the things that I found is that you talk a lot about working with stakeholders. And it's kind of a cliche in cybersecurity that cybersecurity has to get closer to the business. We've been hearing about that for years. So how do you do that actually? What are the challenges involved?
So I think there's a number of challenges involved. And actually, I'm going to tie it into the question that you opened up with, about the first CISO, Steve Katz. And I've mapped out what I call the evolution of the CISO. And I put it into 4 generations. So that was, roughly 32 years ago, right? So if we take and we put it into, I kind of call a generation, to a 10-year run. The first evolution was about, trying to solve a technical problem, as you talked about, an attacker, compromised a dial-up connection. And so Steve's job was to try to deal with what was a technical problem at that time. Fast forward, from 94 to 2004, now all of a sudden, it becomes about being business aligned. And that whole concept of, how do you align with the business goals and objectives? That's where the stakeholders kind of come into play. So we started this, a little over 25 years ago, trying to become aligned with the business stakeholders. That is, anyone within the C-suite, whether you are a COO, you're worried about the operations, and any disruption to the operations is not good, right? So it's being aligned with them and ensuring that there's not a cyber attack or even a technology outage, because really being aligned with the business is about not just cybersecurity, but also technology, which those are two things that we as CISOs have to report on and provide insight into the business, so that when we talk about business impact analysis and what that looks like, each one of those stakeholders is outlined in that. And then you fast forward to, 2015 to 2025, and we were really talking about risk management. And the business, while you're aligned with them, they want to know what is the business risk context of anything cybersecurity or technology related in terms of the loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability of the systems and or the data. We talk about those crown jewels, right? The business wants to make sure those are protected. And so, for me, it is, while security doesn't generate revenue, it protects the generation of revenue, and that's critical to the business and all those stakeholders.
And one other thing that I saw, well, I saw a lot of things, but you mentioned the need to have psychological toughness. And so I'm interested in your definition there. And you think CISOs have that, or some do and some don't, and that's a measure of success?
I think we all have some degree of psychological toughness. Mental fortitude is absolutely necessary. And, we suffer in silence a lot of times, and people don't really know or think about that, but we have to be strong out front, because we are, my favorite movie is A Few Good Men. And, you guys will remember the line, "You want me on that wall, you need me on that wall," right? Well, that's what is expected of us. And so it's that degree of toughness that you saw Jack Nicholson portray in that. And that's kind of what I relate it to. It is you got to be strong and tough out front, while at the same time having empathy for what's going on in the organization, the impact to those stakeholders. So yeah, psychological toughness, some people call it psychological safety, and finding that and being able to have that. But yeah, it's absolutely necessary.
All right, John. So do you, in your meetings with the board, do you tell them you can't handle the truth?
You know, I've never actually used that line, although I've wanted to do it many a time. That is one of my favorite lines, though.
It is. That's a great movie. I love it too. Cyber resilience. That's another concept that you are embracing. We're about to go to RSA next month. There's a lot of hype around this. Product companies try to claim cyber resilience. Tell me your definition and how you really operate there.
Yeah, so cyber resilience is one of the key, what I'll call critical success factors in establishing and maintaining an information security program. So the way I define cyber resilience is it's the ability to withstand, adapt, and recover from whatever incident may occur. So again, whether it's a cybersecurity attack or whether it's a technology outage, and we've seen that, right? We'll go back to the summer of 24. I don't have to say the name of the vendor who had that kind of an outage that had a global effect, but it was, what you saw was the call for cyber resilience and the expectation for that. And before, it was just kind of it was a buzzword. Now it's a requirement as part of a cybersecurity program. And, I've effectively updated my overall security program language. So I actually changed the security program policy to incorporate the expectation that I would deliver cyber resilience with the program, because that's part of my responsibility for protecting the business. So again, it's about being able to withstand anything that comes at you, adapt, and be able to adjust, and then recover from it.
Yes, and probably not by coincidence, your definition really aligns with the NIST definition. So let me move on to exposure management. So you're a proponent of moving from vulnerability to exposure management. And again, I couldn't agree more. I've worked with companies in this area. But vulnerability, when I did some research with CISOs, what I found is there were more process issues and political issues than there were technical issues. So speak to that.
Yeah, it is, we've played whack-a-mole with vulnerabilities for years. I go back to probably 2015 when the first, what was called a threat and vulnerability risk management platform was built. And, we were trying to get our hands wrapped around, how do you deal with the vulnerabilities? How do you get to an acceptable level, if there is such a thing, vulnerabilities in your environment? Because the idea is that you're never going to get to zero, right? So it is, how do you manage that? And as we shifted from being thinking about things very technically to we're really being focused on risk management. That's where, when I start to think about vulnerabilities, I think more about what's the exposure. Because something that I've done for the last 10 or 11 years is do risk quantification around cyber and understand what is the risk in terms of financial impact to the business, but also what are the cascading risks that are the result of any type of cybersecurity attack or outage or any of those types of things, and being able to put it into that business risk context. That's where threat and exposure management comes into play. Understanding the threats by doing threat modeling and those types of things up front. So, what are the things that could potentially impact, could be exploited to impact your environment, and what is the exposure if that exploit actually occurs, and what is the blast radius, and being able to understand all those things, which is far beyond just thinking about things from a known vulnerability perspective. It is being able to predict and or forecast what may happen, being able to take into account threat intelligence, because whether it is your organization itself is explicitly listed or identified in underground chat rooms about a targeted attack, or whether it is just industry wide, or whether it is wrong place, wrong time that your organization is, what could happen, and having some degree of predictability. And that's why I think about probability versus likelihood when you're talking about all this, because to me, likelihood is an art. Probability is a science, because it's based on data that leverages things like threat intelligence and the like. So that's how we understand what is the exposure, and really coming up with dealing about it, establishing priorities from that perspective.
Yeah, I agree. As I said, I've worked with companies. We move beyond CVSS scores. We're looking at predictability. I'm encouraged by the progress you've made, because a lot of companies I talk to haven't gotten there. But John, we've gone almost 12 minutes without mentioning AI, but we're on to the future. So yeah, of course it's coming. What is your role in the governance structure of your company with regard to AI? And then how do you enforce your policies and procedures?
Well, it definitely is a hot topic. And I saved the fourth generation of the evolution of a CISO for now. I kind of predicted that this was going to come up, right? So we're in the fourth generation of the evolution of a CISO, and it is the AI era. We're fully immersed in a digital world. There is no going back, right? And AI is just kind of the next iteration of that. And, it's not new, but it is a different type of application. So when you think about AI governance and what that means, it's about oversight and visibility. If you don't have the visibility, you can't have effective oversight, which is a must. And so my role and responsibility is to ensure that the business has visibility into the risk that the organization has as it relates to the use of AI. So for me, as part of our AI Governance Council within Texas Mutual, I have a role to provide that level of visibility, that level of insight, to bring forward all of the things that I've learned and all the things that I understand about how we protect the organization and its digital assets, being able to identify what are the key controls that we need to have in place. How do we leverage the controls that we already have? Because the goal is to, and this is my tag phrase, I call it my motto today, is enable the responsible use and secure adoption of AI. That's the goal, because we are not here to try to prevent the organization from using AI. That's just not valuable to the organization, because AI is very useful in terms of innovation. It's also very useful in terms of protecting the organization, because we are in a bit of an AI versus AI world now. AI is being used to power attacks. So it is making sure that there's visibility into the threats and the risks that an organization has as it relates to the use of AI, but not to try to stifle it, but to actually enable it and enable them to do so in a responsible and secure way. So it's making sure that they think about it, but that they don't worry about it. And that was the conversation that I just had recently within the organization. I'm not here to prevent you guys from doing it. Our COO is very forward thinking, and one of his goals is to leverage AI, but it is to make sure that they can do so without having the velocity at which they're trying to move impacted.
How about your specific role as a CISO? So what are you looking for with AI enablement today in terms of security, effectiveness, and efficiency? And where do you see it going in the future?
So one of the things is, using it to be efficient, effective, and consistent in whatever the business process is, whether it is claims processing, underwriting, any of those things, or whether it is detecting threats in the environment or attacks in progress, all those types of things. It is leverage it in a way that we can gain the value and outcomes that we seek. If it's on the business side, we're seeking to gain efficiencies in terms of productivity in how we run the business. On the security side, I'm looking at how do we improve our security operations? How do we automate things so that we can further reduce the alert fatigue that, I'm thankful to say we don't have any significant amount of that because we use a strategic approach of managed service providers as well as in-house staff coupled with technologies, but it is leveraging AI that is built within those solutions that we do utilize, that is also utilized within those service providers that we utilize, and making sure that those things are coupled together in a very cohesive way that allows us to be consistent in doing incident response and incident investigations, because AI can certainly identify things at a much higher rate of speed and more effectively than a human. But now there are things that it can't do. AI can't provide context. So my role as the CISO is to ensure that my team, as well as my service providers, understand that context is key, and that I expect that, level 1 and level 2 type analysis and investigation are done by AI and by the service providers, so that when the escalation happens to my team, now we can apply context based on what we know about our environment, about what we know are authorized or approved uses of technology in our environment, what administrators are doing, or if it is actually an administrator that's operating an approved process that we know about, that's context that we apply, that now we can now close that alert very quickly. But also it helps us identify any anomalies that we need to investigate further.
Are you doing any AI type of development, building models, building agents on your own, or do you rely on third parties like vendors and service providers to do that?
Within the security space, we are relying on the vendors right now because, part of it is education, knowledge, and just pure know-how is necessary to me to effectively use agents and build them yourselves. I don't think we're at that point yet where we have that type of knowledge and skill in-house. It's certainly one of the things that we're looking to do is to build that skill and upskill the team in that way, but we're just not there yet. So I'd rather manage a solution that is designed and built and become a design partner, frankly, with those vendors who are building those solutions, so that we can, apply them to our use cases, but not just specifically for us. We want to be thought leaders in the space in terms of the evolution of the use of AI and technology in the security space. And that's part of the challenge, is become that design partner to be able to do so.
And in doing that, how do you get comfortable with agents acting on your behalf? So whether it's agents for detection or agents for response, do you do a test bed? Do you do a POC? Do you work with the vendors in their design? How does that work?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons to me for becoming a design partner and really kind of being part of, any beta type programs that they have, because what it does is we get to operate in a sandbox. and I use that term sandbox intentionally because most people may not know that Texas has a Responsible AI Governance Act that went into effect January 1 of this year. And they actually use the term sandbox, where if you operate in their sandbox, if you want to build an agent that's going to perform certain functions and is going to make decisions, you can do so in that sandbox environment without the concern for being impacted by regulatory penalty or action. So it's a great thing to me, and I thought the bill was very well written, and to provide that, because we're all still trying to figure out a lot of things about this. And so that's part of the plan, is to co-create, if you will, with that vendor, because now we can see how it's going to work. We have lab environments where we test things out all the time. It's where we test out any new features or functionality that may be deployed, because everything we use today is a SaaS solution from a vendor when it comes to security, right? So we want to evaluate things before they generally release a new version of their product that we're using, so we understand what that impact is going to be. Such as like with EDR technology. As much as I want to be near the brand new release as soon as it comes out, I still want to stay, N-1, because I need to vet it out in my environment. But I can go N-0 in that lab environment and not worry about the impact. I can actually get real world results of what's going to happen. And I think that's a great value that you get from that.
John, I know you have a strong commitment to cybersecurity training. So let's move on to the cybersecurity bridge, how we get from the present to the future. I look at all this activity and I think there are some real skills gaps that we have to overcome as we go into a more AI-driven cybersecurity world. So things like better data engineers, prompt engineers, people who can train, or ways to train tier 1 analysts so that they're not doing triage, but they're working hand in hand with AI to advance cybersecurity practices. Where do you think we really need to bone up on security skill sets and training?
That is an exceptional question. And, I think about it in terms of, I've read the World Economic Forum report that talks about the skills that are going to be needed between now and 2030. And there's a lot of AI type skills listed in there, prompt engineering and data engineering and all those things. And to me, the security teams are going to have to become more of security engineers than just security analysts. I have, my team is divided into two functions. I've got security operations, where there are security analysts, and then I've got security architecture and engineering, where I've got a group of security engineers and a principal security architect. And the reason and the goal for that is because while we don't absolutely build anything from scratch in security, it is mostly vendor-led solutions that we deploy, but the architecture and the engineering around how you utilize that in the environment has to be coupled with actually building agents on top of that, even within those platforms. We are, it's no secret to anybody that we're a huge CrowdStrike shop. And one of the things that we find valuable is the components that are being released on how you use AI to detect and respond, and to be consistent in how you perform any of the processes that we go through in our environment, whether it is looking at where there are vulnerability or weaknesses within our architecture, or actually trying to investigate an incident. So being able to be consistent in how an incident report is written. Do you have all the right pieces of data in that incident report so that you can build a knowledge base that allows you to feed that back into AI to be able to be even faster at the next detection?
Yes, that's a good concern, and that's a concern of mine, is does AI is going to accelerate everything. Can security keep up if IT and the business is really moving very quickly and things are changing very much? Certainly, some of the governance suggestions you made really take that into account, but it's a challenge. It's still a challenge for us. So I'm wondering too, what you think of the threat landscape in an AI world. So I'm a big proponent of threat intelligence and analysis, and I'm wondering how much resources or are there new resources that you think need to be applied to threat intelligence analysis, given the changes in AI and maybe even adversarial use of AI?
Yeah, threat intelligence is absolutely critical in being able to do the analysis, because it is being able to be well tied into any of the threat analysis sources that are out there. But you've got to make sure that you've got credible threat intel sources. Some organizations are using a threat intel platform to help them with that and be able to correlate and do all those types of things, that the likes of Recorded Future or Threat Connect or any of those, right? And having those be part of your environment. Where for me, I ensure that it's a critical part of any managed service provider solution that I deploy, as well as any technology solution. That one of the main questions when I'm looking at any of these emerging technologies and to be able to address the rapidly and continuously evolving threat landscape is to how well integrated is threat intelligence, and being able to tie that together with identity threat detection and response. There's identity, there's network, there's data. There are all these different types of threat detection and response that have to be well organized and connected in order for us to be able to be responsive to that evolving threat landscape. Because, to your point, it is AI versus AI. AI is powering attacks, and, it's making it even more, the attackers are becoming more effective, more efficient, and it's the barrier to entry has been lowered even more, because now they don't even have to have significant knowledge. They can just create a prompt that will really kind of trick the AI solution into carrying out and building the attack for them. They don't even really have to know how to outline and build an attack path. They can use AI to help them find the attack path.
Yes, I like I said, I'm a proponent of threat intelligence analysis, mapping that to the MITRE ATT&CK framework and getting left of boom as much as we can. So, John, I am an omniscient budget overlord here for you. And so I'm going to give you an unlimited budget to deal with the future needs of cybersecurity. Given that unlimited budget, what would you who would you hire? What skills? What processes would you need to invest in? What technologies would you need to invest in?
Well,
Or I should say, would like to invest in. I don't want to throw Texas Mutual under the bus.
I would tell you, I've never been asked that question. I've never been given an unlimited amount of money to do security. Although I will say Texas Mutual has been phenomenal from a budgetary standpoint. Our CFO has been great. Our CEO is my number one promoter and fan. So, my shout out to those two people. But if I had an unlimited budget and just, what would I do with it? Honestly, I would invest further into being able to do risk quantification, because what it is, one of the challenges that I have in that regard, because I've got all the technologies I need. I've had a recent maturity assessment done on the program. We're above a 4.0 on a 5-point scale. And so, we are operationally in a great place, and the budget has allowed me to do that. One of the things that I would like to do more of is risk quantification, and because that's where I bring it into the board, because now I can identify the impact from a financial standpoint for each one of those CISOs, but do so in a way that ties it all together, because where they understand where if we it helps justify, the forecast of what I'm projecting. But it's really about how we quantify risk in a way that is understood by the business, that makes decision making a lot quicker. It reduces the number of challenges that you may get because, as much as I have the authority to operate the program and to really run it the way I see fit to protect the organization, I still have to provide a degree of justification. And while I don't need to get consensus, I do have to ensure that all of my stakeholders, which the entirety of the organization are all my stakeholders, that they understand why I'm doing what I'm doing and that I'm not just spending money, recklessly.
John, I love it. I gave you a theoretical and I'd say whimsical unlimited budget, and you came back with a pragmatic, I need to double down on risk management for the business. So, and also it's worth mentioning you were on the board of the FAIR Institute, isn't that correct?
That's correct. It's been almost 2 years now.
And can you just give a brief explanation of what FAIR Institute is to our audience? Because I'm finding people who know it find it extremely valuable, but most people don't.
Yeah, so the FAIR Institute, FAIR stands for Factor Analysis of Information Risk. And it was something that came out of, I go back to about the 2015 World Economic Forum, and when people were really trying to figure out how to be more consistent and more predictable in understanding the risk as a result to the use of technology in a corporate environment. And so what the FAIR Institute did, Jack Jones, phenomenal guy, came up with an approach and a methodology for how you analyze the risk that an organization has as it relates to the use of technology in the environment. And, it's an evolving practice. It's becoming easier to understand, and people are learning more about how to implement it. We're still trying to get over that threshold of understanding how to utilize it, but it's a growing practice that I've done since 2015, and it really is it's a great institute. It's got a lot of education and training on how to do that. So something definitely worth checking out, especially for what I'll say, if you have risk managers or risk analysts, your chief risk officer in your organization, it's something they should take a look at because it's where the world of technology and risk management come together.
Yeah, great answer. And I know that there are resources. Is it fairinstitute.org?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, check that out. Now, I'd love to talk to you all day, John, but you've got all of those screens behind you telling you that there are alerts and vulnerabilities and exposures and everything. So let me ask you one final question, and that is, what's the one piece of advice you'd give our cybersecurity professional audience?
The one piece of advice I would give the audience is this. Remember that security does not generate revenue. It protects the generation of revenue. And in doing so, we have a responsibility to be pragmatic, to be responsible in what we are doing. You're not going to get a lot of recognition. You're not going to get a lot of credit. You're not going to get a pat on the back. But as a digital defender, and that's what I challenge every one of us to consider ourselves as, is a digital defender, is, think about things in a very responsible way, but also continue to learn and grow, because you never get there. This is more than a marathon. It is a journey that never ends. It continues to evolve. So make sure that you as an individual continue to evolve, because it's going to be necessary, because it's, whether you consider yourself a visionary, a thought leader, or whether you're just new to the space, connect, network, share information, because there's power in numbers, and that is what I would challenge every one of us to do is to work together.
That's great. And John, I couldn't agree more. When people ask me about being a cybersecurity professional, I often equate it to being a physician, in that there's new research all the time. There are medical journals. Part of a physician's job is to keep up with that. Part of a cybersecurity professional's job is to keep up with threats, new types of technologies, new ways to measure risk, as you talked about. So, John, thank you so much for being a part of my podcast. And I know I'll see you at RSA.
You absolutely will. Looking forward to it, John. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And to my audience, I'll see you again in 2 weeks for another episode of the Cybersecurity Bridge podcast.